Good afternoon. I'm Carl Garth and welcome to the Champion Chat with Councillor Alison Champion. Good afternoon, Alison. How are you today?
Hi, Carl. I'm fantastic. Happy to be here. Thank you for asking. How about you?
Oh, look, I'm very happy. A bit cold. It's been a rather cold start to the Melbourne winter, but, turn the heater up and relax with a wine at night and we'll be all good. Or a scotch. So, Alison, last month, as you know, in our series on environment and sustainability, we covered FOGO, or as it's known properly, food organics, garden organics. Now, since that podcast, we've had quite a bit of commentary, and I believe you've even had some questions emailed to you about with feedback on FOGO.
Yeah, we have. Since the red bins were delivered, and since the caddies have been delivered, and they're still coming out. If you don't have your caddy yet, they're still coming. They're on their way. We've had residents contact all of us somehow, some way, either with email questions, phone call questions, arguments for and against. We've had residents contact us not just with how to use the actual bins or the caddy, but also, I've actually had some of my residents have got in touch with me and said, look, Alison, I have a disability. I'm struggling with X. Why is the design what it is? And one of the questions was in relation to the bins, and the bin design has actually been around for 40 years. Unfortunately, I actually couldn't help beyond this is what it is, and I actually felt a bit useless, quite frankly. One comment that was made is that, look, with some of the shapes and sizes, or the size of the bins and the design of them, we actually need to get help from others, and that takes away our independence, which is a really brilliant comment to hear, because it really brings home how people really want to be able to do things for themselves, which is excellent. That's brilliant. I know we talked about some of the bin liners. There are some councils have bin liners. We talked about some of those bin liners being made from cornstarch, and you made the argument, Carl, why are we making bin liners from food when some of us don't actually, we're not able to put food on our own tables, let alone line our bins with them. Which is a very good comment. And look, we did discuss, compostability of the bin liners, and some of the bin liners don't compost or break down at the same rate as the food, which defeats the purpose of the exercise. So these were things that were coming up, and there are people who are questioning, oh, sorry, hang on. So when is my red bin going out and when is my recycling bin going out? I'm a little bit confused about that. And then we've also had questions, well, hang on, what's going in the red bin? What goes in the red bin now, and what can I put in my FOGO bin now? What's happening with that? So there are questions around the practicalities of the new process, and that will continue. And one of my fellow councillors has said, okay, Alison, I hope that you and the mayor are available in the first week of July. You're not going away, are you? Because you're going to be getting the phone calls. Yep. Because that's when it starts. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. If anyone has any further questions, please feel free to get in touch with us.
And look, that's a great representation of the type of questions that might come through. I think one of the problems, though, is they're very personal one-to-one communications. And I think there's a lot of people out there who feel like they don't have a voice, or they're not heard, or they don't know, they may not feel that it's something that they're actually allowed to comment on. Some people might think, well, this is fait accompli, I have no choice. So this week, what we've done is we've actually invited some local residents. We've got Bazza from Banyule and we've got Dazza from Darebin as people who are representative of their communities, to give us their views or have their questions and opinions around FOGO and what do they actually know about it. So Darren and Barry, welcome, and how are you both today?
Well, I'll speak first. I'm feeling fantastic. Thanks, Kazza. And it's great to be here with Bazza and Azza.
Thank you very much for having us on the show. We appreciate it very much.
Oh, that's great. So welcome to both of you. And hopefully for Daz's sake, we don't get lost down too many rabbit holes, although he might actually like that.
Mhm.
So,
And if I can just make a comment for those of you who are watching, who are going, why aren't we looking at them? Why aren't we seeing them? The point of the conversation today is around their Darren and Barry's opinions and thoughts, which represent other members of the community, not necessarily what they look like on the screen or their names or their genders or anything like that. It is purely what they are representing, other members of our community who think differently from those of us who are embracing FOGO.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Alice. And the fact that Darren and Barry have come forward courageously to put themselves on a podcast, you know, they're actually talking for those who don't want to get, shall we say, the nasty responses when we need to have measured debate. So let's start with the first question then. And I'll actually direct this one to Darren. How do you feel as a resident this initiative actually affects you either positively or negative?
That's an interesting question there, Carl. I think it's got a lot of maybe layers to it in terms of the answer. Let me say kind of, you know, right from the outset that I'm all for reducing waste. I think our society has a very wasteful way that we consume everything that we consume. And you know, the levels of packaging that we have and the levels that end up in ground fill are ridiculous. So I just want to put that out up front. And when it comes to FOGO, which is, you know, the topic of this conversation, how does it affect me? Well, I think it's definitely got positives and it has negatives. But what I see, I guess, mostly are the negatives. And let me try and explain that. The negatives that we have with our waste at the moment, I think are a bit almost invisible. And I say that in I've been brought up for decades living in society where you consume things, you throw things in the bin, and the bin gets taken away, and you never see or hear of it again. And that's kind of just the pattern. It's the habit, and they're you know, kind of happy with that. And you don't see the problem that creates unless you actively go looking for it. And now with FOGO, obviously it's a solution. It's a partial solution, I might say. But you, as a resident, as a member of society, you have to comply with the FOGO, which means that the solution is not invisible. The solution is right in your face. It's something that you're going to have to deal with every day in order to you know, interact with the new FOGO rules.
Okay, that's very interesting take on that, actually. You know, I suppose previously out of sight, out of mind. Now, if I'm to paraphrase you a little bit,
yeah,
it's now front of mind to force us to take action.
Yeah, and look, I accept that I feel a little bit slack in not understanding, you know, the full impacts of where it goes once it gets collected. So what I did, I was unaware that this podcast existed, and so I went and downloaded last week's, and I got some great insights from last week's podcast, that most of which I didn't know before.
Okay, and Barry, from your position now, how do you feel that this initiative affects you? And again, positively or negatively?
Again, it's going to be very similar to Daz, because there are positives and there are negatives. And the actual initiative itself, I think, is a positive. The fact that we need to do something with wastes, I totally agree. I think when it comes to the negative, and I'm coming from the angle of the family man at home with a family and working very long hours, coming home and having to work some more, I guess the negatives are what we have to do with the FOGO bin. So the work that's involved in it, such as just one example, separating the tea out of the tea bags, and coming home late, doing a lot of work, looking after the family. That's the last thing I'm going to do.
Mm.
How far will it go? Do I separate poo out of poo nappies and things like that? It's one of those things that you look at. Yes, we do need to reduce waste. Yes, we need to think about sustainability. I agree with that. And but with that bin, I think is an extra layer of work.
That's an interesting take, Alison. Would that almost be that people are interpreting the instructions on the FOGO literature that's gone out as almost a mandatory, this is how you must do it, it's black and white, rather than the fact that I think Barry has raised a good point there. Who wants to separate tea bags from teas? Why not? Can we not just put them in the normal waste basket and maybe do as much FOGO as we can?
Every person chooses. Every resident makes their own choices about what they do.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on your nature and the way you think as to whether you feel or believe that you are being instructed to behave a certain way in your home in relation to FOGO. There are going to be, this is something I said in our champion training session a few weeks ago, there are going to be residents who won't follow this process. They won't do it.
Mm-hmm.
For the reasons that Barry's just said. And that's okay. They won't. They will continue down the path that they're continuing down. They will continue to put their food waste in their landfill. They will continue to make an effort. There are people who are going to make an effort to use their caddies and use their green bins as a FOGO bin, and they're going to not separate the tea leaves from the tea bag.
Sure.
There is a way around that, though. You actually buy tea loose leaves and a teapot.
Okay.
And make tea properly. So there's always a way around it. But the other thing is, if you've got if you've got some land, go to Bunnings or Mitre 10 or wherever, or a garden centre, and go buy a compost bin.
And obviously, Alison, you're right. There are ways around it. But the point I was trying to make there is, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Even if people start to make those first few steps, as much as they can do, that's still a start down sustainability.
Absolutely. Yeah, good point. So this is an opportunity for people to stop and think, and go, okay, well, I can do that. I can start by putting, these items. Like, I look at my FOGO bin guide. You mentioned your bin guide there up on your, here we go. So your FOGO bin guide, which comes in your caddy, if you've got to put that on your fridge, like I think, Carl, you were just saying you did, you've got this sitting up on your fridge. If you've got to stop and look at that and go, okay, I can do this with my avocado seeds and I can do this with my tea bags, then that's what you do. And if you want to be okay with it, that's what you do. So that's what the whole point of these documents is. As well as on your caddy, there's information on the top of the lid of the caddy to remind you. And if you just do bit by bit is okay.
Okay. So there was a point you raised also before, Alison, about, I think what you said was an elderly resident, and about the bins, or it might have been a special needs resident, about the bins. Do you feel that there's been, actually, this is actually directed at Barry and Darren. Do both of you feel that there has been enough acknowledgement or collaboration with residents on what they're being asked to do now, or acknowledgement of how it might have affected them? Remembering that this is actually a state-driven initiative that's been put to the local governments to actually implement.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. because I wanted to mention the state government part as well. So, look, I'm not in any way angry with local councils, right? Especially after hearing last week's, well, the most recent podcast where it was obvious that this is something that's been forced down from the state government onto all of the councils, and there's quite a lot of bringing all the councils under the same kind of approach, and every council is going to be rolling out a very similar FOGO, maybe with some slight variations, but it's basically mandated, and if the councils don't comply, it's going to be very, very costly on the councils. So the councils are saying, here's the way we're going to deal with it. Here's the way we're going to not have those costs incurred for landfill increase or blowout by, what was it, about 14 times the price that they were 10 years ago. So yeah, I'm not blaming councils for anything. And as a busy person working in society, I have to say that I don't read everything that I get from the council. So when this comes along, it's something that I might not read the first time I see it. I might not read it the second time I see it. It might be something that my wife's read, but I haven't. It might be something I've read that she hasn't. And to answer the question, has the communication been up for it? It probably has, but have I paid attention to it? Probably not. And the councils can't single out a council area and put an ad on the TV that I'm guaranteed to see, because they can't do that in a small geography like that. So yes, I think the information's there. When I went looking for it, it was everywhere. Well, before I went looking for it, I wasn't paying any attention to it.
Okay, Barry?
Long answer, sorry.
Yeah, I would have to agree. Yeah. And you know what? I want to make a point with Daniel at the moment. Before the execution of the fortnightly pickups, they have been very generous with picking the bins up every week for now, so that we get educated for what we have to do with FOGO. And just like Daz, I haven't paid any attention. There may have been a lot of education correspondence behind all of this, but because we're so busy, it's very hard to keep up with something that we just want to come home to. It's not work. It's not something. That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not trying to make it into more work. That's what I feel like is happening. But up until now, the council has been very generous with allowing rubbish to be taken away in the new bins, and also just giving us the opportunity to learn about FOGO.
Okay.
If you hadn't invited us on this podcast, I don't know if I would even been aware that it was basically starting in a couple of weeks' time.
Correct.
I'd be surprised. I'd be going, oh, what's going on? And playing catch up at that point.
Right. Okay, interesting. One of the things that I've heard from residents in the past, Alison, and it's something that maybe Barry and Darren can give an insight to, is they feel that these initiatives actually lead to higher rates because our rates go up year on year. Barry and Darren, would you agree with that?
Well,
that's a perception.
I think everyone has a perception that something is, or they're skeptical to begin with. Everything that changes, that comes with skepticism. But, having fortunately listened to last week, I realized that this is partly about preventing our rates from going through the roof. So, yeah, if you've got enough information, maybe you can understand it better. But definitely everything starts with skepticism when it's changing.
But Alison, to be fair, rates generally go up most years. So if they do go up in the next financial year, this isn't a cause from FOGO. This would actually be a cause from all of the other things that council probably have to look at.
Correct. Yeah, correct. And the other thing too is that the state government puts a rate cap on all councils. So up until, so in my time on council, so the last 6 years, there has been a rate cap. Prior to that, there hasn't been a rate cap. And very recently, we were shown some figures over the last, I think it was since 1994, so since the amalgamation, our corporate services director gave us the rates changes, and they're all been increases since 1994, annual rates increases since then. And prior to my time on council, when there wasn't a rate cap, some years rates went up in double figures. Rates were going up, 12%, 15%. And so it got to a point, and I believe other councils were doing the same sort of thing. So it's not just a Banyule thing. It's actually, that was a possibility in Victoria to be able to do that. And we're at a point now where certainly in the last 6 years, a rate cap has been introduced. And the idea of the rate cap, it encourages councils to not rely on rates only, residents' rates only, to pay for services and provisions for the council, for the council area. It encourages each council to be constructive, to show initiative, to be creative, to be entrepreneurial in ways to find other income. And Banyule does that very, very well. And there are some councils who don't do that very well for whatever reason. So so this is where we have a rate cap, and it's there for a reason.
It's an interesting point, because if I draw a very long bow there, I'd almost say that rate cap means that if we don't reduce our landfill, it would be very easy for a council to find themselves in some dire financial straits.
Absolutely correct.
Interesting.
So coming to that point, if you say that there's a large increase if we were to follow the state government mandate, what is the percentage of the rubbish that does make up food organics?
It's 40%.
Who worked that
About
out?
40%. It's about 40% of our landfill is actually food organics.
40%.
Yeah.
Even if I didn't follow the FOGO, my food waste is not at 40%. It's way less.
Yeah.
How do you get to 40%? A lot of my stuff will be packaging and things that are not sustainable, like very simply put, food packaging. But the actual food waste is very low.
Yeah. So you're telling me that you consume what you buy, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, what you can physically consume, your body can tolerate and needs. Whereas anything that you don't like, the packaging, goes into the landfill. It's my understanding is that it's actually looked at the end, where in the waste centre. So you're asking about how do you get to that 40%? Well, how do you know? It's calculated at the waste centre.
Correct. Okay.
And we were surprised when we got that information too.
I'm just trying to find the figure, but and maybe you've got it, Alison, on the average food wastage per resident. We had that in the last.
That was in the last
discussion.
Yeah, I've got a figure here. The whole of the city of Banyule Waste puts about 125 tonnes of food ends up in landfill every week.
So it is obviously, Barry, that's an average across the entire city.
Commercial and residential, yeah.
Some people are going to be worse than others, and as you quite rightly point out, commercial includes restaurants.
Yeah.
Restaurants are going to be very high disposers of food waste.
Yeah. And Barry, I'm the same as you. I you know what? I look at I don't know how you can create 40% of your rubbish being FOGO, food. I don't know how to do that.
That's hard.
In my household.
Yeah, that's right. A house full of family, it's still very hard to get 40%. That's extremely wasteful. Again, and you can tell I'm coming from the angle of not liking FOGO. However, I do not like waste at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as Darren said earlier, one of the first things he said was, we throw things out. We buy things and throw things out. We are actually we have a lot more now in our communities, in our society. We do have a lot more now, and that excess has been continuing growing since World War II. I remember my mother-in-law many, many years ago, she grew up she's Italian, and during the war, she was living in Belgium with her grandmother. And and then she went back to Italy, back to home after the war. And I distinctly remember her saying to me many years ago, Alison, after the war, we didn't have rubbish pickup. That never happened. There was no such thing because no one was throwing anything out. There was nothing to throw out. We kept everything. And this is where if you speak with the next generations, the older generations, they reuse things, they will patch things up, they will look for a spare part, they'll do whatever it takes to find, certainly, the grandparents, and my mother's 90, so that generation is, how do I repair this? How do I keep this and make it better so I can use it again so I don't have to buy another one?
Can I add to that though, Alison? I mean, if I was to have a gripe with FOGO, it's that we're solving the wrong problem.
Okay.
We're solving the problem that there's too much crap being thrown out of our house.
Yeah.
But the real problem is there's too much crap coming into our house.
Yeah.
Can I say crap?
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
It's too late now. There's too much rubbish coming into our house in the first place. And
because it can.
And it's fine for the state government to make mandates about, how we deal with it at the other end. But where are the mandates, the real mandates that are affecting the other end of the whole process? They took away single-use plastic bags from supermarkets, and then every piece of fruit got wrapped in plastic from that point onwards. The amount of rubbish coming from the supermarket actually increased. It just wasn't those throwaway bags anymore. It was everything else. So I feel like too much wagging the tail, or the tail wagging the dog, rather than going upstream and tackling the problem where it actually starts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you, Barry. And Darren, sorry, I can't read I've got my glasses on. Darren, you're absolutely right. And this is actually one of my arguments that I do bring into our council group when we're in conversation about this. My argument is it's not enough for us to, be able to choose from so many options of products and services, pick something and go, well, I don't need part of that anymore, I can throw it out. My thing is, you know what, you walk down the couple of aisles of the supermarket that have shampoos and conditioners, and you're just spoilt for choice. And you're going, how come I'm so spoilt for choice? How come I can buy so many different brands of television? How come I don't get to choose between one or two pieces of garden equipment? How come I've got 5 in front of me that I can choose from? And then I've got to sit down and I've got to work out what they're made from, what the value for money is, what I'm paying for, where are they made? There's another one now. Where are they made? And it becomes very confusing and daunting when, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, we had a choice of 1 or 2 items. It comes from trade agreements.
Look, we have to understand something, that we've become part of the global market,
Mm-hmm.
and we are a consumption-based society at the moment. Now,
Mm-hmm.
until we change that,
Yep.
which unfortunately changing that has huge impacts on economics and jobs and development. So whilst I totally agree with the comments we've got there. I think we've gotten a little bit off track of FOGO versus, shall we say, some very first world problems around how we operate as a society.
There's another podcast. Anyway.
Exactly right. So, Darren, you might find yourself being invited back to that one. So just to bring us back, Darren and Barry, are you actually aware of any of the benefits that are actually going to happen out of this initiative aside from the landfill?
No.
Right. Alison, would you like to talk about some of the ones, especially around water consumption and the compost and where it's going to?
So the benefits of FOGO, aside from less landfill. So really in our households, we are now being asked to put our food and garden organics into a bin or a compost bin, and all that is going to landfill is what has to go to landfill that can't be recycled or, converted some way. So the process of, so within our home, we're just simply divvying up our waste product more specifically, differently from what we've been doing, and we're being asked to reduce landfill. So our landfill bin is lower, it's lighter, it doesn't need to go out as often. It's the FOGO bin that's going to be picked up every week from the 4th of July. That is going out every single week. So there is less organic waste going into landfill, which means that there's a lower cost to council because landfill rates went up. They've gone up 100%. Sorry, they're going to go, from 2009, when the landfill rate was
$9 a tonne.
$9 a tonne. It is now, currently it is $100 a tonne. And by the end of the year, it's $125 a tonne, and people like you and I pay for that. So we're trying to reduce the landfill cost to council and to us as residents. The process of FOGO is very controlled at the other end. So when your FOGO bin is picked up, it is taken to a waste centre, a FOGO waste centre in Bulla, and there is a controlled composting process. There is less methane being produced, a lot less methane, virtually no methane being produced, which is actually the dangerous gas to our air and our environment. And with the compost that comes out at the other end of that controlled process, our farmland, our commercial farmland benefits. So wineries, for example, and our crops, our other orchards, for example, can actually purchase that compost and produce a better product that we end up purchasing and consuming. So those are some of the benefits.
Do we though? The thing is, if that goes to that centre, the centre sells it to the farms use it. Obviously, there's a profit made somewhere along the lines there. Do we, the residents who do that work of divvying up, as you say, the food organics, share in that profit?
And in what? And so, what is your vision for that shared profit?
Well, they're making money from our hard work to separate the rubbish.
So, sorry. So, are you saying that there is a reduction in our rates because of that, or?
Well, whatever it is, someone is profiteering from the green waste that's going to now go to, well, like you said, and they're creating a good quality compost going to farms. But we don't know whether the end result comes back to us or not. Like I said, the wineries get it, farms get it. Do we get some of the wine? Do we get some of the fruit?
Yeah.
Do we get some of the profit from that centre that's creating the compost, the wonderful compost?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's a great question, actually. And I'm really happy to follow that up. Just find out where the dollar benefits, is that right? Come back to the residents?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it is still increased work from the household to make that happen.
Yeah, I think what you described, Alison, was, because it's being reused in society, right? There is a benefit somewhere out there that someone's getting, and it's not costing more resources to get that, other than the reprocessing. But that's kind of an invisible benefit to us residents. And in the same way, we can't see the reduction in our rates because our rates won't be reduced. Our rates just won't go up as much, but we won't really have visibility of how much they would have gone up if FOGO wasn't there. So again, the benefit is there, but it's hard to see. And unless it's pointed out, we'll miss it. And all we'll see is what Baz is describing is, well, it's effort without benefit. Even though there is a benefit, it's just, it doesn't feel like there's much.
Yeah, okay. And I'm really happy to follow that up. That's a really good point. I'm more than happy to follow that up. So Barry, you believe you should have some dollars back in your pocket. Is that correct?
Absolutely. For the work that we do.
Yeah, okay. So for you, my understanding is you and those there who are obviously possibly thinking the way you are, your idea of FOGO is, I am being given extra work in my own household by the state government and local government. I therefore want to be compensated financially.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so, yeah, go on. Sorry, go on.
There is also a general knowledge of South Australia. And again, now this goes back to not local, this is federal.
Yeah.
And I'll make that very clear. The government's taking in from other Commonwealth countries radioactive waste for profit and burying that out back of South Australia. So whilst the end user, the residents that go on their daily lives, honest work, have to do all this work for someone else to profiteer, you have the federal government also profiteering out of radioactive waste that's not spoken of very often.
So Barry, would I be fair in saying that we talk very heavily about sustainability? We've got state governments pushing down on local governments to make residents do things to make us more sustainable. And yet we have a federal government for the last 20, 30 years has been taking in something and doing activities that would not be seen as sustainable.
That's right, since 1970s, yeah.
So really you're talking about the inequity of policies. In one hand, we're coming so strong about sustainability, and yet in the other one, profiteering by being a dump.
That's right. We are separating tea leaves out of tea bags, whilst the other end, we've got barrels of radioactive waste being buried.
It's interesting. It's an interesting sort of concept there, Barry, because in the end, it's a little bit like some of the viewpoints that people have on climate change. We stop our coal in Australia has no impact on the rest of the world. And I'm not going to argue climate change. We're not here for that. The one thing I will say, though, is that all journeys that we take in life start with that first step. What is our first step? If FOGO is one of our first steps, and I'm glad you've raised that radioactive waste, because maybe 90% of Australians have absolutely no idea that that's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this little FOGO podcast might actually have people start to ask their federal MPs, why are we doing this? So you could have just started the first step yourself.
I agree with, again, planet sustainability, and I love forestry, and I love the fact that I think we have an opportunity to reverse what is bad with climate change and so forth, sustainability, what have you. I believe it's just gone about this direction the wrong way. If, for example, if our rates were to go up, $20, for example, $10 for plant and $10 for labor for every single resident, and they put that into planting a tree per population, we have an ability to create more oxygen for this planet. We have an ability for landfill to actually be broken down much quicker as well. And some of that, that will reverse the negative impact of landfill. but we don't seem to be doing that.
Hmm.
Okay.
I think this comes back to, Alison, even when we had one of our previous environment and sustainability, and we talked about renewable energy. The two participants we had that day all wanted to get to the same point, but had different ways of getting there. And I think what Barry's raising is there are many ways that we could approach this problem, but it seems like we're only focused on one.
Mm.
Is that fair enough comment, Barry?
Yeah, and to put it, I would be happy to pay that extra if we went to that.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is a point that I was making off camera just before we came on. We've only started the journey and the conversations back to sustainability. And I say back because this is something, sustainability was something that we did, for centuries before the Industrial Revolution, because we didn't have as much as we do now. So we're on the start of a journey back to earth, back to simple, what is probably a slightly more simple way of living. And this is going to be going on for at least the next 2 generations. We're only scratching the surface at the moment. And Barry makes really good points. There are a lot of things going on at different levels of government that we as residents don't know.
Actually, Alison, I would like to revisit something that Barry was talking about earlier, and that was the 40% of landfill being food waste. And he asked the question, that's commercial and residential. I am right, aren't I, in saying that FOGO is also now a commercial responsibility within the LGA?
This is a conversation I've been having with, not only my own workplace, but also council officers as well. What I see is this, look, for me, FOGO is great, love it, don't have a problem with it, happy to continue. I've been living this life anyway. So for me, it's not work, it's just bigger. And yet I look at the back of our office and I look at an awful lot of paper being disposed of in the commercial bins. And having come from the hospitality industry, as well as hospitality education every single day, seeing for many, many years, and I know it's still happening, the amount of food waste in that industry, because there isn't necessarily another option, or because there isn't necessarily another regulated option or a big option. I remember when I was working many, many years ago at La Luna Bistro in North Carlton, and I was the floor supervisor. One of our other floor staff, big on sustainability as well. This is 20 years ago. Okay, he was big on sustainability as well. He could see a whole lot of waste going in the bin. The food organics going into landfill, and he put in a process. The couple of nights that he worked was he would provide a separate bin with a bin liner, and people would put, the chefs, when they were prepping, would put their food scraps in the bin, and he would take that bin and he would put it into his compost bin, or share it out amongst other people who had compost bins where he lived in Melbourne. That lasted while he was an employee, because no one else did it, because we didn't have to. But you're absolutely right. I personally have seen so much waste in that industry. And then there's the medical industry. How much waste is in the medical industry? So the residential FOGO system is simply scratching the surface. Councils and state government must also go into, right now, how do we do this for business and other entities? And that's been an argument that I've also put forward to our officers and to our councillor group. It's not enough to do this in our own home. It has to be across all organisations, all businesses.
I mean, I am a resident, and whilst I'm, behind the FOGO, at 40%, knowing that of that 40%, roughly probably 70% of that would be from commercial. To understand that commercial who are in the same city and have commercial rates to the council I've got to ask, you know, as a resident, I'm being asked to do something. And again, like I said, I'm not anti-FOGO. But the question I ask here is, why has the state government not actually focused on the biggest users first, not the secondary users? And I'm sure that Barry and Darren might have some views on that too.
Oh, well, that's similar to the first point that I made in that we've got a solution for the wrong problem. The problem is upstream, and in what you're describing, the problem is with a different group of residents, you know, the commercial residents. I think more needs to be done to stop the waste in the first place, so that there is less to be done in actually dealing with it later downstream.
Okay.
Mm.
Barry?
Yeah, exactly right. I know for a fact, because in my line of work, I do travel and do work in a lot of restaurants, and I actually sign off on people's hygiene and sanitary or biohazard sites and so forth. And I do see that commercial bins in restaurants are not council bins. They are what they pay for commercial, for example, like Bioila and the like. So they are paid, they are picked up and taken away. The businesses will not care to separate, and there's no facility for private rubbish collectors to separate the waste.
Okay, interesting. So Barry and Darren, I guess the question I have is, as residents, I asked before, did you feel that you'd been appropriately engaged? But and both of you have actually acknowledged that you've been quite almost unaware of this this initiative through your own lack of follow through. But the question the question I would ask is, if you want to make a change, would either of you be actually interested in actively engaging with the local government if they opened up forums for residents to have their say or to help as an initiative comes out?
I'm certainly not opposed to being part of a forum there, Carl. But to the point though, you know, what I was trying to say earlier is that this initiative is just one of so many other things demanding our attention. We're busy people, we've got lives, we've got jobs, we've got families, we've got hundreds of other things that we have to do, in, you know, being the Uber driver for our kids and everything else. And this is just something that is happening that just isn't demanding our attention. That's why I was not aware to the full extent of what was happening. But now that I've got myself up to speed, yeah, I've got some thoughts about it, and you know, my thoughts are generally around, you know, by the time the rubbish has reached the point of we're trying to get rid of it out of our house, it's really become quite intertwined, right? When it left the original source, it was just an apple, but by the time it gets, you know, to your place, it's part of an apple pie with foil and paper, which has got wax on it, and now it's got food, and everything else is kind of thrown in together. And separating that, you can see how it's a clumsy effort to do the separation. If we can reduce the intertwining of it along the way somewhat, so there's less to kind of unravel at the end, I think it would be a lot easier and simpler. We wouldn't be being told to put our meat in the freezer until, you know, it's time to chuck it out in case it gets really stinky in the bin. You know, that to me, that's a really clumsy way of handling it, because there isn't an easier way.
Interesting. Barry?
Yeah, and again, those words come out again, be part of a local initiative or LGA initiative. It just says and screams more work. Again, why are the residents having to push for this work? It's always more work, more time, more work, more effort for such a small change, like Daz has pointed out.
You know what? I'm hearing you both, and I get exactly where you're coming from. So we're going to go. Barry talked about tea bags, and Darren talked about the apple pie. We didn't used to go and buy an apple pie. We had to make it.
Correct.
And packaging with that was probably paper around the flour, so we had a bag of flour was paper, sugar, paper bag. We got the ingredients separately, and they are organic ingredients or recyclable ingredients in the case of paper.
And the packaging was recyclable.
Exactly. And then Barry, you're talking about tea bags. Well, tea leaves are actually a plant. And I grew up with not a tea bag. I grew up with making a proper cup of tea, and then I learnt more about it when I was in hospitality. And I prefer to use tea leaves, and whether they're chamomile or green or Ceylon or whatever, they're leaves, and they go straight into the compost bin. For me, compost bin. We changed to buying an apple pie. We changed to buying tea bags because of the convenience, because we're not always going to have a person at home doing all the cooking or the preparation for the meals. A lot of us, as you say, Darren, we're out at work. We're at work, we're earning the money because we've got more to pay for, because we have so many more activities in our lives and so many more things to buy, that we're not going to make an apple pie anymore. And therefore, we get an apple pie in foil because of our food hygiene rules. By the way, we're very stringent with our food hygiene. In our wax-lined box, that's what we've come to. So how do we reel this back? What do? Do we reel this back? Do we not buy apple pies anymore because we're not going to manufacture them? That's probably not going to happen, because again, that's another job, another industry. So do we look at the packaging that the products are in?
I think we do. I think somewhere along the line we mentioned the cornstarch being used as bags, and I think those sorts of things are more palatable. We can solve the hunger problem. We can solve the packaging problem with organic packaging. I've seen in my Facebook feeds and everywhere else, I see all these great green solutions, but they're kind of technology that is wondrous, that doesn't go anywhere. You never see it actually appearing on your shelf, as the packaging has been completely revolutionized as being something that you can be proud of consuming it and throwing it out, because it's going to not cause a problem for our next generation.
Yeah, I believe that. Exactly right. It's too small a solution for a much bigger problem. The other half of the conversation is too, with the FOGO entering into our lives, is that the general waste is only being picked up every fortnight. Now, I know recently Banning has been picking up the red bin weekly, and I applaud them for that. That's really, really generous. But I can also say, because I've got a young family, I've got a baby, I filled up that bin entirely every single week with nappies.
Yeah.
And if that was to sit for 2 weeks, it is not a nice thing to take. Even as it stands now, with being picked up weekly, I've actually hired people to take the bin out to the nature strip.
Wait till it's 40 degrees, Bazza.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And in my line of work, I actually shut down homes and sites because of the hazards that it imposes, the rotting toxic waste. That it's far beyond.
Can't you put the nappies in your freezer?
Actually, it's interesting that you raised that, Bazza and Dazza. We won't put nappies in the freezer, please. Oof. But Banyul has actually put some thought into that, and have their own. If you go to the council website, there's a What's On page that talks about the Baniel design nappy.
Mhm.
Alison, is there something you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, Barry, you're absolutely right. That is the one item in a household that is regularly thrown out, fills up a bin. When I grew up, I was in just non-disposable nappies. I was comfortable, I guess, but it came with its own hazards. But that's what we were doing in the 70s and earlier. The disposable nappy, again, it allowed for convenience, like the pre-made apple pie and the tea bag. So it came from came out of a time, people doing more work. How do we make it more convenient for us with our babies? So this is where it comes from. So now we're going back to, right, how do we make this an option that our bin is not going to fill up with disposable nappies? So Baniel has come up with a reusable nappy or a washable nappy that is much more comfortable and more useful and better functioning than those in the 70s, where you can actually purchase one of those nappies or a couple of those nappies. They are shaped, so they look like one of the designs, a disposable nappy design, but it's something that it's made from materials that can be washed. So you just pop your the waste, whatever the waste is in the nappy, just goes into your toilet, and you can actually wash your nappies.
So here's the thing with that. As a new parent coming out of the hospital and the obstetricians and the nurses have taught us to use one particular brand of nappies, one type of nappy, and it's only the Huggies.
Why do you think that is?
They get paid for it, but that's okay. See, we get taught that from the institution, and I'm going to listen to a professor over anyone else because that's the society's hierarchy.
Yeah, so the message I'm hearing with that from you, Barry, is this is bigger. There's a bigger picture than the type of nappy that you use or how you look after your baby.
Absolutely.
There's something else going on. Yeah, there's something else going on in the background that we don't know about until we're in that position. Yeah. And then we get a little bit of an insight into it through what you've just been told. You know, I'm being told I have to buy this nappy, or I am being given this nappy, and, you know, there's something else going on in the background.
Here's what the council have now told us.
Mm-hmm.
Buy these reusable nappies and increase workload in the household again. More work.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here and say that what this actually screams out to me is that, again, we have a state government initiative being pushed down to LGA level, and yet we have not engaged all the major players across all the levels. So we actually have a fractured rollout or a flawed rollout. And because of that, we've then got mixed messages. We're not all on the same sheet. And this is what it's this sort of, I don't want to use the term half-assed, but it does sound like it, rollout, where we're trying to do something for the sake of being seen to do something rather than doing something in the right way to guarantee the greatest level of success. So, you know, again, if I listen to everyone who's been on this podcast, I think everybody sees the merit in FOGO. I think what I'm hearing is that the rollout itself, the execution plan, has not been, it's not covering all levels of society that it needs to be a success. Now, people can disagree with me on that.
What you're saying is fair, Carl. I think you got there in the end. That the rollout itself is reasonably good. Whether or not I paid attention to it, that's no fault of the rollout. But is it hitting the biggest sources, the points in the chain that you know create the most waste? Is it hitting the parts of the chain that would make the most difference? that's where it's probably a bit clumsy in that it's probably not as targeted as it could be. But that's more a result of what was handed to the councils as being
Correct.
Here's the problem we want you to solve, and here's what the solution needs to kind of look like. You know, councils weren't. I don't think councils were given a lot of scope to go and look outside of what they were told that they needed to do.
Yeah, I think you might have misunderstood me a little bit there, Darren. I wasn't having a go there at the LGA at all. I'm actually putting that one fairly and squarely at state level, because what they haven't done, and it's an interesting point raised by Barry, is they haven't actually got the influences on side. Barry himself talked about us having a hierarchical society. He's going to listen to a professor or a doctor, and especially from a hospital. If the state government hasn't got the hospitals or the big influences, or even commercial businesses on side in this, how is a local government who, as you quite rightly pointed out, we don't pay a lot of attention to unless it's something that directly impacts our rates, what hope have they got? So I think where we've all come to on this is that FOGO is a great initiative, but it definitely needs a lot more drive at state level across some of the bigger players.
Yeah, FOGO is only a part of the solution. There's more pieces in the whole chain that are a problem that need to be dealt with. And I don't want to be living anywhere near a landfill that's just going to be nappies and cat litter by the sound of it.
Very good.
And I would actually extend it to federal level as well, not just state. I mentioned several months ago in one of the previous podcasts, we've just signed, I think it was the end of last year, Australia signed a trade agreement with 14 other countries. That's not changing.
And
we'll get Argentinian pears that have been packaged in Malaysia.
That's right. I can add to that. It's actually on Alison's side that I'm not sure if the listeners know about this. In America, I think, I've forgotten which state, it could be California or San Francisco, BMW have actually paid the governments there big amounts of money for the rights to their landfill. It uses their methane to run the whole entire factory, and it is 100% run of that methane, 100%. So therefore, that landfill breaks down a bit quicker as well with the work that goes on, with an outsourced company doing the work to maintain and clean up their mess, and they're profiteering from that at the same time. Here, why can't we do that? Why can't we recycle the methane coming out of landfill? Landfill is messy. I don't agree with landfills. I know we need it, but there's work that can be done to use that power. As it seems, we have a power problem. Why can't we use that power?
If you did use that power, though, Bazza, you'd still be contributing to greenhouse gas.
That's right. So at any level, doesn't matter what you do, it's still going to be created. So what's the solution?
You know what? I think that's a great final comment and opinion for this on this podcast. I'm sure we could definitely debate that one for another hour or two, but I think we might call it there.
We need nuclear power.
Well, okay, we can have another energy podcast, Alison, and we'll bring Bazza and Dazza in, and they can have a chat with
Councillor Tom and Councillor Peter.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's bold. Let's do that.
Yeah, I want to do that. That would be fun. But on a closing note, I would like to thank Bazza, Dazza, Azza, and Kazza. This has been a very fun podcast today. So thank you all for your inputs and your opinions. And Barry and Darren, thank you very much for appearing with us today.
Yeah.
Any
Thank you
other- my
both.
pleasure.
Really appreciated your time.
Thank you both, Carl, Alison.
And
Yeah,
I'd like
mate.
to thank everybody out there watching this podcast and invite you to join us again next month on the Champion Chat, where we will continue our podcast series on environment and sustainability. So thank you all and have a wonderful time.
Bye.
See y'all.